I'm John T. Miller. My friends call me JT. I gave up my corporate job 8 years ago to start my own business, and it's been a success story ever since. Now Dawn is the breadwinner for a large company, and in the 24 years since we've been married she's moved up the ladder, and now she works in their education department. She now works in the education sector and undergoes a lot of training every year to keep up with technological advances. At 46 years old she is amazing and looks nothing like a 30-year-old and still turns heads. She is 58 years old and weighs only 118 pounds. You would never guess she is a mom of two. She's even taken a liking to my home-brewed beer and started a club for it, and I go with her whenever I can. Our son is about to finish his last year at UF, and he's trying to get a position with my company, but I've told him he has to get some experience out there first, at least for 5 years. She's off to Dallas now, so I'm at home making English brown nails. Life seems too good to be true, and I'm about to find out just how true it is. One of my buddies from the beer club needs a lift from the airport, which is easy enough, but while I'm waiting at baggage claim I spot some of Dawn's colleagues. Strangely, Dawn isn't with them, so I call her office number and her voicemail confirmed that she was supposed to be in Dallas but her coworkers weren't, and I met up with Bobby to share my confusion, and he suggested that I contact another member of the club, Steve, who happened to be a detective. Even though it was late I didn't beat around the bush and told him straight out that I thought Dawn was playing me, and he agreed to help me. After I explained the whole airport situation and Dawn's dodgy voicemail, I had a feeling that my happily ever after was just a hallucination, so I spoke to Steve, who was my detective friend from the beer club, and I told him the whole story of Dawn, her traveling schedule, her routine when she got back, her traveling arrangements, her living arrangements. The next day, Frank gave me a call and we went over everything, and he asked me point blank if I was sure I wanted to uncover this potential mess. Frank would get someone in Dallas to go undercover on Dawn. His team would poke around the training schedule and contact those instructors from the airport. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I started with Dawn's dresser. Her wardrobe was piled high with boxes, nothing out of the ordinary, but I decided to go to the bathroom first, and there wasn't anything out of the ordinary back in the wardrobe. I went through her clothes and shoeboxes, everything, but there was nothing that suggested that she had a secret affair or anything weird. Turned my house upside down: master bedroom, guest room, den, garage, even the attic, and I wasn't getting any closer to the truth. And that's when Frank showed up, covered in spy gear, and we rigged the house with cameras and tape recorders, and turned Ann's car into a tracking device. And her co-workers Tom, Paul, and Bev, who had both flown back in on a Wednesday night, didn't make any big deal out of it. Dawn was supposed to just teach and not deal with any of the menial tasks in the classroom. I sat there seething with anger. I remembered what my dad used to say: keep calm, but it was hard. Dawn had been feeding me lies and I was determined to get her to face the truth. We made a plan. Frank would pick up Dawn's luggage at the airport and I would find a way to break the washing machine so it wouldn't start right away. I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed, so I spent the night tossing and turning in Kent's room. The next morning, I went to the office at my usual routine to clear my head. He wanted to know if I recognized anyone, and I squinted my eyes and took a good look at the photo, and yes, the only face I recognized was Dawn's. After looking at it for a long time, I told him one of the men looked kind of familiar, but I didn't recognize him. Frank next revealed that it was something out of a spy movie, that they'd set up cameras in the hotel, watching the corridors, catching everyone's movements, that they looked like colleagues, or maybe old mates, nothing shady. After a meal at a nearby restaurant, they each settle the bill, go back to the hotel to get their stuff, and check out. I told him to let me come, that he had another file, and while he was showing it to me, the Dallas crew went into those 2 rooms and filmed the entire 9 yards with the cleaning crew. They searched for DNA on the bed sheets, collected used glasses for fingerprints, and rummaged through the bins, and I'm preparing for the lab results, and the waiting is the worst. And knowing that all these pieces can be pieced together to give me a picture of Dawn that I never wanted to see, it feels like a punch to the gut, realizing that the woman I married could betray me like this. What to do next? Dawn will be home tonight. First we have to destroy the washing machine, and in the kitchen, where Frank is taking the children's DNA samples, he's rummaging through Dawn's hairbrush, and a chill runs up and down my spine when he asks me for the children's hair. but the thought that my children aren't mine, that's a whole other level of betrayal, and we've already cut the children's hair, one for each of them, which should be enough, and Frank's got another plan, to leave Dawn's luggage at the airport, to buy us a little bit of time, so that I've got time to sort things out, and then the real ACT begins, and I can hug and kiss her and sit next to her and listen to her stories, and it'll be as if nothing happened, and I'll be able to take her out to the countryside, and I'll be able to make sure that I've got the time I need. I can take her out and sleep with her while Frank's team unravels Dawn's secrets. Can I make it? Can I put up with the lies and the pretenses just to get to the truth? And I tell Frank yes I will, I have to, and right now the truth is all that matters, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much pain it causes, and Frank's wheels are turning, and he has a plan, and he wonders if I can make a trip or something, to get rid of Dawn, to get rid of her, and then the real ACT will begin. Dump Dawn, maybe even catch her at the ACT if she's messing around. I asked Frank about it and he said that with me out of town, Dawn might feel the opportunity to spill the beans, especially if she's out cheating. I kept thinking about her briefcase. It wasn't ideal, but Frank gave me a little bug to put on later that night. Frank gave me one last task on the way out: check Dawn's underwear for any signs, stay calm. He reminded me. I was trying, but it was like working at heights. I was on the deck drinking a beer and trying to stay calm just as I was about to go, and just as I'm about to go in, Frank calls. They've grabbed Dawn's luggage and they're taking it to the lab. Remember, stay calm, he says. That's what I insisted on as I prepared for the evening's performance. Dawn arrived, clearly exhausted from the journey, fuming about the lost luggage and especially about a couple of new pairs of slacks, but she still had the energy for a fond hug and the usual "I miss you." She seemed genuinely happy to be home, which only added to my ACT feelings. I have to do better at this deception game or she'll read me like a book. On Saturday morning, Dawn wasn't up yet, probably because she had lost her luggage and she didn't feel like doing her laundry, so I snuck a peek at her panties like a pervert, looking for any sign of infidelity. After a shower, I started the coffee and picked up the paper, trying to keep things normal. Dawn smiled and walked into the kitchen and I prepared her coffee and breakfast. I had to laugh when she made jokes about the luggage. Over dinner at the Italian restaurant we always went to, it was like a scene from a film where the main characters pretend everything is normal. We chatted about our trip, my upcoming run on Lewis Street, and the luggage she half hoped would stay lost just for an excuse to buy more stuff, except for those new slacks she liked. After dinner, like any other night before a business trip, the drive to Lewis Street was my time to think, and while I was usually thinking about business, this time all I had on my mind was Dawn. On the way I updated Frank on the weekend and tried to get his thoughts, and although I hadn't heard anything yet, he assured me that he would keep in touch. These guys knew each other too well, their casual demeanor, the way they handled themselves, it all pointed to a long-term fling, and Frank said that outside the hotel room, the six of them were just friends. The last bit of advice Frank gave me was to make a phone call and decide what I should do with Dawn and this whole thing, and that's when I contacted my lawyer, Mike, and asked him for contact details of the best divorce lawyers in the neighborhood. I called Mike Davidson, ESQ, and asked him for the name of the best divorce attorney in the state. I talked to Fred about our golf plans, trying to keep to the normal pattern of business trips, and Frank called me that night to check in, and I let him know that he and Dave Ford had a reputation to live up to, and that I was preparing for whatever was coming next, and that this was no longer a defensive battle, and that I was ready to take the field. The next morning I finally spoke to Dave Ford's attorney and I briefed him on the situation, and he appreciated my strategy and acknowledged Frank's investigative skills. The biggest question Dave asked me was about my intentions, and I said bluntly that if Dawn cheated, I would file for divorce. I needed time to weigh my divorce options to decide whether to come out strong or take the path of least resistance. I knew something was up when Frank and Steve arrived at my hotel room out of the blue. Frank's expression was serious as he prepared to make the announcement, and Steve's presence suddenly struck me as a necessary opportunity. My heart sank when Frank explained that they had matched the DNA from Dawn's hair to the evidence on the bed. As I stood there pacing and ranting, I was barely aware of Frank and Steve's presence. My perfect world had not only crumbled, it was gone. What was I to do now? Every plan, every next step seemed pointless against the backdrop of lies spanning more than 2 decades. The revelation about Kent, Emily, and Dawn's decades-long deception wasn't just bad news, it turned everything I knew about my life upside down. From initial disbelief to cold-hearted determination, Frank himself told me the news was right, and Steve's presence wasn't just there to support me, it was a necessary pillar to keep me on my feet after the calm storm. With Steve and Frank's guidance, we laid out my options, and I focused my attention on moving forward and making sure that this betrayal cost everyone involved dearly. I slept poorly that night, but their company kept me from sinking and kept me focused on what needed to be done. My decision was becoming clear: I was going to make everyone pay for their role in this deception. My divorce from Dawn wouldn't be a silent retreat, but a public revelation of her adultery. Yes, it would drag my own pain out into the light of day, but it would also expose the lies I'd disguised as a life in Georgia for so many years. Confronted with the stark reality of Dawn's infidelity, I was torn between the satisfaction of a court proceeding on the crime of adultery and the pragmatism of a no-frills marriage. My strong desire to confront Dawn and her fait accompli head-on in the courtroom was at odds with Frank and Dave's opinions clashed, and they both favored the latter course. This strategy would be both more efficient and less financially stressful, saving both time and money, as well as the opportunity to expose Dawn's infidelity. It was there that I learned that Dawn hadn't missed a beat on my trip to the streets of Lewis, that the past behavior of the Gang of Six was a different matter, that their pattern of booking connecting rooms, the various combinations of members attending these trips, was a planned betrayal, and my frustration boiled over at the thought of their deception. I had the crazy idea of exposing my wife's adultery on our 25th wedding anniversary. Frank knew her routine and he was planning a spying operation to get her. It wouldn't hold up in court, but I needed to know the truth for myself. And the perfect time for the big reveal was right around the corner, and Dawn was teaching a class in Orlando, and the end of the class coincided with our wedding anniversary, and I told everyone that right then and there. I dropped this bombshell, and it was time to show Dawn and her buddies what happens when you mess with me, and I was ready to bounce back and make them feel the pain they'd inflicted on us. And Frank had just been in Dave's office. Frank has just revealed to us the truth of the matter. Like something out of a soap opera, the Gang of Six and her colleagues have been sneaking around for over 20 years. Ever since they started working for their company, they've mastered the whole secret life thing to an art. But at night they sneak into their secret rooms and then sneak back into their own before anyone else gets up, with the exception of certain nights like Saturday and on Thursdays. Their behavior was so convincing. They'd been playing this game for 24 years, and they kept it all hidden from everyone's view. That Frank's team, operating with their usual efficiency, worked with the hotel's cleaning service to gather the necessary evidence, and after the encounters in those connecting rooms provided a wealth of DNA evidence, sheets stained with the Six DNA, that the paternity of George and Chuck's unknowing relationship with Emily and Ken had been confirmed. Paternity was confirmed, and their genetic markers were unmistakably present in the evidence collected. George C. Thomas lives in Richmond, Virginia with his wife and 2 adult children, and his life is about to be turned upside down by the addition of his daughter. And similarly, Chuck lives in Columbia, South Carolina, and enjoys a stable married life with his high school sweetheart. The 6 of them have been lying to everyone for 23 years, pretending they're happily married until the truth comes out, but their little Bill is about to crash and burn. Seeing my own life fall apart is just a microcosm of the chaos they're about to face. Frank was scrambling to dig up the truth. He needed to find the answers by next Wednesday. In Dave's office, the smell of bombs was thick in the air. It turned out that Dawn's business trip to Orlando was just a prelude to our anniversary. Gosh, she didn't care one bit that we'd been married for 25 years. Henry was the father of Joyce's daughter and Kathleen's son, while George and Chuck were the fathers of Kathleen's daughter, and Joyce was the only one who has children with her husband. I've been through all the sadness and anger, and now I just want to be strategic for a little while longer so I can drop the bomb. But now it was payback time, and Frank's men were getting ready to do the spying in San Diego that they'd been doing in Washington. But this time my focus was on the operation in Orlando, and I'd show up on Wednesday as the instructor, surprise everyone, and then reveal the truth in front of all of you. And Dave and his team were getting all of the legal stuff ready for the big day, and as the time neared, Dave, Frank, Steve, and I went over everything. We wanted to make sure that every angle was covered that Frank's boys would be there to keep an eye on the six for last-minute information, not just to expose Dawn and her friends, but also to make a big statement that I was going to stand up and change everything, and they had no idea what was going to happen. And on the Saturday after Dawn's departure, I called the spouses of the six, and I gave them made up a story about a surprise for our 25th anniversary and invited them to join us in Orlando. Then I asked Kent and Emily to come to Orlando as well and said we were going to surprise their mother on Tuesday night, and I sat them down and told them about Dawn and how I wasn't their real father, and I warned them that it might be tough because the news would be in the hometown paper and I'd say some pretty nasty things to Dawn and her friends, and I told them that it wasn't going to change anything between us and that I loved them. And that I'd be happy for them to be here, and that I'd be happy for them to be here, and that I'd be happy for them to be here. No matter what happens, they're my kids in my heart. And Kent has tears in his eyes and asks me if I can forgive Dawn, and Emily wants to know why we can't try to work things out, and I have a hard time keeping my cool, but I take a deep breath and I let them imagine themselves in my shoes and that the person they love the most has been cheating on them, and let them understand why I can't forgive and forget them. And finally I tell them that whether or not to be there is their choice and that I love them now and forever. It's like in the film, everything is perfect, you have a good job, the kids are great, you do family things every day like football practice and family holidays, you're grateful for a life like this and think it doesn't get any better. Then I ask them to imagine another kind of film. In this one their spouse is in a hotel room, not with them but with someone else, and when their spouse gets to the ace of spades, and they were very excited, but not the kind of excited you want to be, and I asked Kent, do you think your wife really loves you and Emily? And I asked her to think about how she'd feel if her husband was one of the men in the room, and I told them that less than a mile from here right now, they're filming another film like this, and I asked them how they'd feel if they found out that they weren't the biological father of the baby, or if Emily's husband had a baby with someone else. I explained to Kent and Emily how their mom had stayed an extra 2 days for ZX and then needed a whole day to recover before she could be with her family. Kent held back tears and admitted that he had never seen anything like this before. He realized that he didn't want to be treated like this by his wife, and he had seen the pain that it had caused me. I love you, Dad, he said. He still wasn't sure that he could face this confrontation. Emily was adamant. She was angry and ready to back me up, telling Kent that he needed to back us up as well. That Mom chose them over us, she said, and it seemed to make Kent feel all right. Emily was desperate to know what I had planned for the next day, so I told her to invite 6 spouses to what they thought would be a celebration of our 25th wedding anniversary, which would blow their minds, and that I intended to let them see all the evidence for themselves. I wanted Dawn's affair to come to light in the most impactful way possible, so that she and her friends would face the consequences of their actions directly from their own families. PM. Waiting for us in the hotel lobby was a lawyer from Dave's firm, a private investigator from Frank's team, and a man who was responsible for filming everything that was about to happen. The florist had delivered the 25 red roses that I'd ordered, and Emily and the other women had thought they were beautiful, but I could tell Emily was ready to go, and I had to remind her to stay calm because I was the one in charge of this. 45 Emily couldn't wait. Kent was close by her side, and the other spouses were full of anticipation. Dawn's face turned as red as a rose when she saw me coming, and I made a joke that had the whole room roaring with laughter as Dawn beamed and introduced me to the class as JT, her beloved husband. Emily and the rest of the surprise group stormed into the room. The photographer then snapped a picture capturing the shock on Dawn's face and the sheer panic on the faces of her affair group members. I couldn't help but smile broadly as I watched the scene unfold. Emily was filled with righteous anger as she took charge of introducing Dawn to the spouses of her affair partners. I had John capture every moment on video and encouraged the guests to speak on camera. I took a moment to catch my breath, calm my pounding heart, and look at the bewildered and horrified expressions of the 6. I took Emily's arm and guided her to George. Then I said, "Emily, I'd like to introduce you to George Thomas. This is your biological father." Dawn went pale, and George's wife looked at me disbelievingly and asked me to repeat what I'd just said. George is Emily's biological father. I then handed him a second document stating that I was going to sue him for 21 years of child support and emotional distress. Finally, I showed George a copy of the lawsuit I had filed against his employer for failing to enforce the morality clause in his employment contract. Again, I said to George's wife, "Don't worry, I have copies of all the evidence and you can use them as you wish." The classroom erupted into chaos. The other spouses who didn't know the real purpose of the gathering were stunned, and Kent stepped forward, much to my surprise. "I present to you your biological father, Charles Kent Nixon," and as I spoke, the room fell silent. The attorney then handed me some papers again, which I went over with Chuck, just as I had gone over the papers with George, and Chuck's wife asked for copies of the evidence so she could use them in class. But I had the bombshell ready for the others. Dawn was crying in her chair, and again I had everyone's attention, and it wasn't what you'd expect. And when I walked in, I said, "Wait a minute, because we're just getting started," and the room went silent, and I told them about the Gang of Six and the history of hooking up with them over 24 years in class, and I went through all the paternity of all the children and left them in no doubt about the web of life and deceitful network of relationships there was. No doubt in the room, as everyone was knocked out by the reality of what was happening back in the hotel room. I thought back on how it all happened. Emily wanted to confront her biological father right away, and that messed up my plans, and my carefully crafted script went out the window. But in the end it didn't matter. I managed to show the Gang of Six that they were exposed. I embarrassed them in front of everyone, and the truth came out. It was a hard and painful day, but it was also the beginning of the end of a long and difficult chapter in my life. Then a knock on the door brought me to Emily and Kent. They had been caring for their mother, but now they were with me, offering me hugs and words of love. Emily was angry and hurt, but there was strength in her eyes as she told me she was taking Dawn home for a while, and that despite everything that had happened, she felt the power of love and responsibility for her mother. Kent shared his pain and love and asked to come back with me in search of some normalcy in the midst of the turmoil. And when Emily left to be with her mother, Kent assured me of her love, and Kent stayed, and we shared a few beers together as father and son tried to find our footing on new ground. And they're trying to patch things up with their kids, but from what I can tell, there's a long way to go, and their exes don't want anything to do with them, other than the consequences of the Gang of Six have been severe, especially for the kids. Trust issues linger, and I don't know if Kent will ever settle down. Emily has been getting along with Dawn in her own way. No excuses, no lies. We've both found support from people who've been through similar trials and tribulations. The kids are even bonding with their half-siblings and planning a Nashville reunion soon, to reunite in Nashville soon, which strained their relationship with Dawn. As for me, I've broken up with Dawn. We divorced soon after, and she got the house. I used George and Chuck's money to gain trust for Emily and Kent. I don't want their money, but I do want them to feel the hurt of their behavior. I've been dating in the hope of finding someone new to share a life with and love with. I believe in love, and I'm waiting. One day I'll have grandchildren to pamper. Life doesn't stop for anyone. You have to keep going despite the pain. Emily and Kent need me, and I need to be there for them. Life goes on, and so do I. I look forward to what's to come, and always keep in mind the saying, don't fight back, don't curse back. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please consider bookmarking and subscribing. If you haven't bookmarked and subscribed yet, feel free to share your thoughts on these events in the comments below. Take care.